exposed to these ideas of white man's burden, colonialism, and post colonialism helped me garner a deeper understanding of culture, labor, production, and power. At this point, I read a short story by a writer belonging to the Santhal community called The Adivasi Will Not Dance. Adivasis are the indigenous people of India. The short story was the third narrative that shaped the choices I made in life. The story was the narration of how a power plant in southeastern India was built on the Adivasi land at the cost of the community's displacement, and how, when they are insensitively invited to dance at the inaugural of that very plant, the chief of the community says, I quote, "We will sing and dance before you, but tell us, do we have a reason to sing and dance? Do we have a reason to be happy? You will now start building the power plant, but this plant will be the end of us all, the end of all the Adivasi. These men sitting beside you have told you that this power plant will change our fortunes. But these same men have forced us out of our homes and villages. We have nowhere to go, nowhere to grow our crops. How can this plant be any good for us?" He is then jailed for raising these questions. These lines kept echoing every time I prepared for my business school entrance exam. Every time I looked at the placement brochure of the premium institutes, I couldn't help but wonder how every one of those recruiters were flouting labor laws, displacing indigenous communities, depleting resources, polluting the environment, and doing absolutely nothing about systemic corruption. I deeply sensed a clash of values and uneasiness. With absolutely no qualms, these corporates were violating the values nurtured by our constitution. They were violating the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. It was disturbing for me to think of working with such organizations, but my parents brushed it off as my angry young Indian face. Despite seeing how visibly I was troubled, they wanted me to be practical. Because, of course, an MBA at a premier business school was the ideal second generation learner's route to social mobility, the obvious pathway to securing the upper middle class lifestyle. But the one question I always had was, at what cost? At whose cost was I securing this lifestyle? I did a simple social experiment in order to know if it was just my parents or everyone else who was asking me to be practical. So I asked my UG classmates how they would react if soft drink companies openly said that they were the top polluters of the environment for 3 consecutive years and openly admitted to the number of farmers they were stealing water from. And all of this is pasted on the cans. To my utter shock, most responses rationalized that if you think of it, it's that way with every other industry. Someone needs to compromise. It's farmers in this case and laborers in others. These answers made me understand deeply middle class values. It showed how, as part of the urban middle class population, we are born into a reality where neoliberal values were the commonsensical norms, taken for granted, unquestioned. We grew up hearing people say, "You need to be competitive, you need to work harder, you are at fault, it is your individual problem." Everything, everything from climate change to caste discrimination is individualized and normalized. In some sense, the process of conscientization from the exposure to the UN film and the several of these narratives made me realize that if not for these alternative configurations, values, and the counter narratives I was exposed to, I would have never gotten to acknowledge my own privilege or the realities around me. And most importantly, see how the battle is beyond the individual. It was indeed a structural one. Once you are on this path, Once your mind and heart are open, it is very difficult to return to the old ways of thinking or being. Let me conclude this sharing of my journey through three life changing critical events. The first was the reading a version of Chief Seattle's speech of 1854, which made me see what growing up in a consumerist society does to a 13-year-old. It doesn't let you see how all of these things are, after all, interconnected. That there is a world out there that belongs to every one of us. And who exactly gave us the right to put a price on our jungles, rivers, and land? The society we live in normalizes and idealizes the urge to be richer than your parents, to a point where you stop seeing that wealth accumulation, low wages, displacement of communities, farmer suicides, the militarized state taking the side of the mining corporation and shooting the public for calling out this tragedy, soft drink companies depleting groundwater, corporate fraud, all of these work hand in hand. It is also ironic, hypocritical, and a scam what modern philanthropy is. On the one hand, they don't pay wealth tax, exploit laborers, displace communities, pay extremely low wages, and then on the other hand, they run CSR campaigns about saving the world. In the May of 2018, I knew I wanted to pursue the MA Education degree at Tata Institute of Social Sciences. I was specifically drawn to education because of Paulo Freire's notion and practice of conscientization. I realized education had the potential to conscientize each of us. It had the power to make us aware of our individual problems and then situate them in the systemic structures. If education really had this power to conscientize us, then why has it not been able to do the same for people with so much power, entitlement, and privilege? In fact, the people with access to the best quality education. This was the understanding I wanted to draw from my course. It would also be the natural culmination of the three critical events that shaped the choices I made in life. Choosing to live your values is always difficult. And I came to this after disappointing my parents by turning down all the premier business schools. In my opinion, I came to this at the right time. It helped me understand how gender, religion, class, and most importantly, caste unfold in a world that is getting militarized on a daily basis. I do believe that despite all of this hopelessness, one day we will manage to make the public will the political will. I would like to leave you with a quote by Henry Gero I keep going back to on the toughest of days. I quote, "Power is not always about domination, not exclusively. It's also about resistance. Young people have a lot of power. They can shut societies down. They can block streets, engage in direct action, educate their parents. They are a potent political force. What they need to do is to recognize themselves as such. And I think they need to act, because I think that a discourse of anxiety should give way to a discourse of critique. And a discourse of critique should give way to a discourse of possibility. And a discourse of possibility means that you can imagine a future very different from the present." Unquote. Thank you.